One of the biggest keys to working successfully in Photoshop is having accurate color rendition of images. In order to achieve this, we have to understand a little bit about both working spaces and color gamut. Every image you open in Photoshop has to be viewed through a working space. A working space, also referred to as a color space, is an artificial model that contains a range of colors. Think of a working space like a paint bucket. Now, the larger the gamut of a working space, the more unique and individual colors a working space will contain. So gamut determines the size of our paint bucket. Why does any of this matter? Well, every digital image is made up of unique and individual colors. So for a high-quality workflow, we need to ensure that our working space in Photoshop is large enough to contain the range of colors present in our images. You can't edit what you can't see, and you don't want to inadvertently lose colors in an image. Now I've got some files here to help illustrate my point. Let's open up Chapter 1. Inside your Chapter 1 folder, I want you to open up these 4 files, space 01, 2, 3, and 4. I'll simply click on the first file and shift-click on the last one. I'll press Enter to invoke the Open button. And let's take a look at space 01. This is a model of the sRGB color space, probably the most common color space there is. You see it all the time on the web, but it's a very small space. How small is it? Well, let's compare it to the Adobe 1998 color space. I'll click on the Space 2 document, and you can see that Adobe 1998 engulfs the entire gamut of the sRGB color space. You can see out here in the blues over into the cyans and into the greens and back into the yellows that Adobe 1998 is much larger than sRGB. Let's take a look at the Space 03 file. This shows the ProPhoto working space. That's even larger than Adobe 1998. You can see the sort of ghosted image here of the Adobe 98 space, and inside that is the sRGB space. So we're looking at a very, very large gamut color space here with ProPhoto. Let's click on Space 04 here, and we can get a sort of an overview of the 3 of them. Here we've got the gamut of our sRGB space, followed by Adobe 1998. So again, you can see just how large Adobe 1998 is compared to sRGB, and again with ProPhoto, it's significantly larger. Now, why is this important for us? As I mentioned, every image you open up has a set of unique and individual colors. Now, if you have an image that contains colors that fall outside or beyond the sRGB color space, what will happen? If your image has colors that exist in this range out here and you view it through an sRGB working space, those colors will simply not be visible to you. They will all be clipped to the nearest in-gamut color, so you're going to lose differentiation between individual and unique colors. Now, what if you're working in an Adobe RGB color space and you open a file that has colors that exceed even this larger gamut? The same thing will happen. If there are colors in your image that exist over here that are outside that Adobe RGB space and your Photoshop working space is set to Adobe RGB, you can't see those colors, you can't edit them, you can't do anything with them, and those colors will be clipped, they will be lost. So it becomes very important to take into consideration the types of images that you'll be working with when you go to set up your color settings in Photoshop. If you're shooting with a digital SLR, for example, there is a very strong likelihood that some of your images can fall outside the Adobe RGB gamut, so ProPhoto would be a very good choice. If you are scanning film exclusively, by and large, those images should fall nicely within the Adobe RGB space. And if you are 100% absolutely super duper certain that your images are only destined for the web or otherwise being viewed on a monitor or computer screen, then sRGB can certainly be a fine choice. If your images fall among these 3 categories, then the most conservative and safest choice is going to be to select ProPhoto as your RGB working space. So how do we set ProPhoto as our working space in Photoshop? Well, to do that, we need to go to Photoshop's Color Settings dialog. The shortcut is Command-Shift-K on the Mac, Control-Shift-K on Windows. You can also find that here in the Edit menu. We'll scroll down to the bottom and choose Color Settings. Now I'd like for you to choose North America General Purpose 2 in your Settings option, just so we're starting from the same place. And here's where we're going to make our changes. Under working spaces, let's look at RGB. The default here is sRGB, and we just talked about why that's not a good solution. So we're going to click and choose ProPhoto RGB. For CMYK, it's fine to leave it set to US Web-Coded Swap version 2. Now for grayscale, this applies only to grayscale images. We're going to click on dot gain 20% and change that to gray gamma 2.2. That's probably one of the most common grayscale working spaces that you'll run into. And spot is fine at a dot gain of 20. Now let's look here at color management policies, because these are very important. We have separate policies that we can set independently for RGB, CMYK, and grayscale images. They're all set currently to preserve embedded profiles. Here's your other choices. We could turn it off, or we could choose convert to working RGB. By far, the safest choice here is preserve embedded profiles. Now what does this mean? This means that if our color space, let's say for RGB images, is ProPhoto RGB, and we open an image in Photoshop that has a color space of sRGB, the sRGB color space will be honored. So the appearance of that image will not change unexpectedly. So we want to keep all three of these to preserve embedded profiles. Now we can tell Photoshop to give us a heads up whenever there's a mismatch between a file's embedded working space and the default working space that we set up here in this dialog box. If we check Ask When Opening, Photoshop will give us a warning whenever there's a mismatch between a file's embedded profile and our current working space. Now in the warning dialog, the default choice will be set to preserve embedded profiles, which we've set here as our preferred behavior, but we will have the opportunity to change this to a different option if necessary. For missing profiles, now this is very important. If you're opening an image that does not have a profile, it's not tagged with sRGB or Adobe 1998 or Gray Gamma 2.2, we do want to know about that. So we want to check here and say Ask When Opening. Now let's go here and click on the More Options button. I want to verify a couple of settings here. Under conversion options for the engine, you want to have that say Adobe ACE. Intent, it's fine to leave it relative colorimetric, and you can have these next three options checked. What you do not want to have checked are these advanced controls, desaturate monitor colors and blend RGB colors. We want to leave these two options off. Because we made changes to the preset, we now have custom settings, and if we choose any other preset from that settings menu, our changes will be lost. To keep that from happening, we're going to save these settings by pressing the Save button. So I'll click here. By default, Photoshop is choosing the correct folder to set these into. Let's call this TT Demo, and we'll simply hit the Save button. Here's an option that allows us to type descriptive notes about this setting. We're going to clear this by selecting the text and pressing the Delete key, and then we'll hit OK. Now under Settings we have TT Demo. So if for any reason we ever need to change here and go to, let's say, North America General Purpose 2, we can quickly and easily get back to our settings by choosing TT Demo. Let's hit OK, and now we've got our color settings.